Chapter 9. The top floor of the Western Europa and Regina Hotel faces the Grand Canal. With tall, wide windows and full balconies, the terrace suites are simply a masterpiece. The hotel is also only about 3 blocks from San Marco Piazza, and although it took us 18 blocks of turns and backtracking to get here, it was very close to the scene of the crime. Are these suites worth $12,000 a night in off-season? That's for someone else to decide. All I knew was that Tara had a great taste and an unlimited American Express card. We had lost that poor fucker Bobby about 8 blocks into the run, and although we wished him well, we were not going back for him. Now, would he give us up? That remained to be seen. One thing was for sure. If anyone in their right mind was looking for us, the 2 most wanted people in Europe this week, they would not be looking in a $12,000 a night suite on the Grand Canal. Or so I thought. We had just gotten into the 5,000 square foot suite when Tara called down for some room service, a suit, and a tailor for me, and for the red Versace dress she had spotted in the shop by the elevator. She left the footwear up to the girl in the shop by simply telling her that she trusted her. What arrived was a flood of people. The classic tuxedo for me, and the shop girl had indeed come through with some Pradas for Tara. After they all left, we made our way into the bathtub, and although it was not as ornate as the one in Turkey, it did its job. And my fall into total surrender was complete now. There was no turning back. And why would I want to? As I laid there next to her on 3,000 count linen sheets, I wondered what would become of us. How would or could all of this work out? Tara was eating some gold flake covered figs and dipping them in white chocolate. A few small drips of chocolate ran down her perfect chin. I reached over and wiped them off. She was perfect, even in her mistakes. And although these few hours in this palace of a room were the best in my life, I still had a few hundred nagging questions that needed at least a half-ass answer. "Hey," I started, "how did you know I was in trouble in the water?" I asked the most important one first. She smiled and leaned into me, kissing me full on the mouth, and then rolling off the bed and trotting naked over to her purse. She pulled out her cell phone and flung herself back next to me. "Here," she said, "open the app on the phone," and then pointed it at me. It started flashing a red dot over the map of Venice. "You have some kind of tracking chip on me?" I asked. "How the fuck did that happen and when?" She smirked again. "Man, your recall is still not back yet. You know about this tech. It's nanotech tracking. Millions of them in you. They were in the perfume I sprayed on you back in Florida. They last about 5 days before you pee them out." She finished by taking the phone and pretending it was a penis and making a whizzing sound. Then I wondered about Bobby for a second. "Can you track that poor pilot with that?" I asked. She looked oddly at me again. "Duke, he knows where I was heading. He'll be here after he loses the horde," she offered, and then jumped out of bed and threw her dress in the air. Then she stepped under it, and it billowed over her and fell into place like it was a magic show. I was impressed. I did not do that with my suit. I just put it on the same way I always put in a $10,000 tuxedo. Very carefully. We needed to get a move on anyhow, and though I did not want it to end, there was still a matter of figuring out how to get out of Italy without being murdered. Once dressed, we made our way out onto the terrace to see the water by night. The view was amazing. And that's when I saw them, the horde. And one of them looked up and saw me. They were all there, and it only took them a few seconds to rush into the hotel lobby, like 1,000 Agent Smiths from the Matrix movie. And that was when Tara looked right at me, and then jumped. As I was falling, I could see the dark and murky water below me. It was going to be cold, and a vastly contrasting end to the perfect night. I hit the water hard and sunk below it, drink glass still in hand. A moment later, we had made it to a small dock and were in a gondola. I was laying in the boat. Tara was standing, pushing the pole deep into the canal. We headed inward from the Grand Canal to smaller ones, and from there we made our way to the other side of Venice. I could only imagine the mess back at the suite, all those pissed off people in one small place. Perhaps they would give up, or perhaps it would only strengthen their resolve. They might join forces, the evangelicals and labor union members forging an odd alliance with the last of the Ethiopian contingent and the Vatican secret police, helping the Border Patrol, Venice Police Department, and whoever was representing Interpol and other agencies to be named later. Angry security guards from the hotel might even join in too. And what about the other hotel staff? Did we tip enough to the shop girl or the tailor? They too might be added to the list of grievances of some kind. A real League of Nations, like the UN of revenge, bent on laying some kind of ass-whooping on us. We abandoned the gondola at the Rio de San Girolamo and walked a few blocks to a small marina where we could steal yet another boat and make for the mainland. We could not wait around for them to find us again. Tara said that once we got to the other side, she would get a burner phone and call for an extraction. That was fine by me, but in all of this, there was something that had become completely lost. The point. We had come here, me by kidnapping, to find out why I was targeted all the way back in Florida. But had we found out anything? I didn't know, and I needed to. Hey, did we ever find out why I was on the hit list? Yes, Christ, I forgot to tell you in all the confusion and the sex and you leaving me in the basement of the third world, she joked. I felt bad about that now, and she could tell. It's okay, I forgive you, but that climb up the vent shaft was not pretty. Anyhow, the OMD have been targeting any one of us that might be aware of them because they have been in the process of going straight. She finished. I was shocked. I'd never wrote anything like that, and I was still unsure if she was right about any of this. So, a totally evil group going straight? Doing what? I asked. You're not going to believe this, but they bought a controlling stock in the Bass Pro Outlet Company in the U.S. They've moved their headquarters to that stupid pyramid building in Memphis, so we got to get there ASAP and find them. They will never think that we would come there because, you know. She stopped, like I would understand, but I did not, as usual. What? I asked her, as she slowed the boat to the dock and we jumped off, not even trying to tie the boat off. She walked right up to a woman on the phone and dropped her and took her phone. She dialed what seemed like a lot of numbers and simply went silent. She looked back at me. What? She asked. I'm on hold. What do you mean, you know? I asked again. Oh, yeah, well, you know, it's a suicide mission. And then into the phone she said, 2 to pick up, at Via Paso Campalto, by the small dock, and hurry, we need to be stateside in 12 hours. She tossed the phone into the water and took my hand. We can hide over here between the villas until the ride gets here. Suicide? I asked her, and she smiled. Well, for anyone but us. Now? It should be a cakewalk. Chapter 10. By night, the ridiculousness of the pyramid of Memphis, Tennessee, is reduced, and from the right angle, at the right distance, it can almost be attractive. Until you remember that its very existence in history is a tale that is best told by a fool to a fool. Built as a tourist attraction and basketball arena, the American Pyramid was a far-reaching and completely flawed concept from the get-go. Since it served as a poor sports venue and Mission Impossible for sound mixers as a concert venue, then it was a blight on the land for decades, and now it had been retooled as a Bass Pro Outlet superstore and hotel by an ultra-secret, clandestine, and possibly imaginary evil cabal. It was a lot to take in. We had been flown back to the States by a private and insanely fast jet, another one of those small-size Concorde supersonic ones. We had landed on a runway in an exclusive fly-in neighborhood for the ultra-rich in Mississippi, which was about an hour outside of Memphis, where a black SUV was waiting on the runway. And we made our way to the stupidest villain hideout since a Bond villain had hollowed out a volcano. Now we had checked into the honeymoon suite, and we were waiting until dark to start creeping around after hours. The plan, as I understood it, was to do some recon of the place and look for any hidden rooms or low levels that the OMD might be working out of. We were working under the assumption that even if they had gone completely legit, their old habits of meeting and secretly running things from behind walls and in dark underground areas would still be preferred. Let's face it, these types never really liked anyone to see them. It stood to reason that even if they had found Christ, not one of them would ever be photographed with a couple of handicapped kids in a wheelchair holding an oversized donation check in the local paper. It was just not their style. We laid there on the bed, fully dressed in black, with our black knitted masks in hand. Tara wanted to fool around, but I was too tense. Over the past few days, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Hell, I could not even take a small boat trip without becoming a major international news story. And it was a big story, and it was made bigger, of course, by the theft of the Pope's chopper and the crash. My photo, hanging from the rescue line at the bottom of the Pope's copter, was on every newspaper in Europe, which isn't an easy thing to happen. Someone or organization was angry enough to force every media agency to help them root me out. I was sure that even in sleepy little Melbourne, Florida, people had seen it. I was one of the most wanted men in the fucking world as of 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time this evening. Truth was, if I had gone to a 7-Eleven and saw my face screened on a big gulp cup, it would not have surprised me. Tara, however, had managed to avoid all photos, and at this time, there was no mention of her now or our totally lost to us accomplice, Bobby the pilot. It was as if he and Tara did not even exist at all, which was disconcerting, to say the least. I mean, before, when I thought that maybe I was locked in a room with some office at Total Recall with Arnold drooling and babbling to myself, that was one thing. But now, I was an international criminal on a crime spree of unprecedented magnitude. And it seemed like I had done every fucking bit of it all by myself. Reality, as it turns out, is even more confounding than fantasy. The very idea that I could have been, at one moment, lost in a stupor of self-loathing and writer's block, and the next just got up and ripped a hole in the fucking world was unbelievable. How would anyone believe that I could have found a supersonic plane, flew to Turkey, unleashed a tsunami of shit on the old world, when I did not even have more than $112 in the fucking bank and was barely able to drive, is beyond me. And I had just dropped off my family at the airport 2 days earlier, like every other normal person in the world. Nope, I was not anything close to the prototypical spy. In fact, whatever that was, I was a few thousand miles from there, passed out in a pool of my own filth. Yet the story was out there, in full color. Me, hanging from a helicopter over the Mediterranean. No one even asked the simplest of all questions, like who was fucking flying the thing, or how did I steal it when it was flown to get me? It was a world gone mad. Look, I liked the sex, I'm not going to say otherwise. But she would have to pull some strings or whatever real agency that she knew about to fix this shit, because elsewise I'd have to live on a mountain in Alaska with the Wolverine to find some peace, and even then, Logan might turn on me. People love that fucking Pope. No one listens to him, and everyone knows he's full of shit, yet billions of people have some strange affection for the tall hat-wearing bastard. I was flipping back and forth between Newsmax, MSNBC, NPR, and PBS, and everyone was talking shit about me. Like I had been found in bed with Gary Glitter, Jared from Subway, and a Boy Scout troop dressed in private girls' school uniforms. All of us singing OMD songs, while Dennis Hopper huffed ether as he danced on a pink convertible, and Isabella Rossellini screamed into the darkness, "He put this disease on me!" It was looking like that if they found me anywhere on the planet, I was going to some chamber under a tree in the forest where a man with 6 fingers on one hand would stretch me out on a medieval rack until I was 19 feet long and 3 inches thick. I was so mad and completely twisted that I was making media references faster than Tara could identify them. "I'm going to need more than a giant and a masked man to save me," I yelled at her as I threw the remote at the flat-screen TV. The Princess Bride, right?" she asked. I ignored her. I needed to think. I needed to walk. I needed to be alone. I was out the door and walking the street before she could stop me, and before I remembered that I was the most hated man in the world. Once on the street, I walked over to the water and just stood there, looking at the black water of the Mississippi River. Slowly, I realized that no matter what happened, my life was over. Not just the old one, that I really did not seem to care about, but the half-life that I imagined I might have with her. Even the dream of us at Fiji seemed to be slipping away, replaced by a few of the more horrible scenes from Les Mis and The Passion of the Christ. I put my head in my hands, and then suddenly, a voice from behind me brought me back to the real world. Are you fighting the demons, son?" it said, and I opened my eyes wide. I saw a hand in front of me, holding a flyer from some place called the Holy War Temple of the Sexual Redeemer. He was wearing a long brown robe, like a monk, and his head was shaved. He must have been around 60 years old, but his eyes were bright blue, and he had some kind of strange presence to him. "What demon?" I asked. He smiled at me, and then in a low voice replied, "The gaydom, the homo demon," he said, and he pulled out a picture from his robe pocket of a thin young man in a Tom Ford ad that had been photoshopped to add some horns and some drips on his face and neck. "What the fuck?" was all I could say. He seemed unaware of my disgust. "I know, right? That's man gravy on his face there, and them be his evil demon horns. People think we photoshopped them on him, but that's the reverse. They, Homo Cartel, they shopped them off the photo before they printed them." he ended, shaking his solid evidence in my face. His face was red now. A bead of sweat was running down it, and he was clearly all worked up since he had somehow found someone to talk to about this stunning and totally true revelation. "Well, that's incredible," I said, and I meant it, in the truest sense of the word, not credible. He seemed happy that I had not taken off in a full sprint or hit him like every other fucking person that he ever told this bullshit to. "I'm the founder of the church. I'm called Toad Vardis," he offered. "Really? Do you know what that means?" I asked, just for shits and giggles. He smiled at me like he was proud of it. "It means the Toad of Truth." And while it was a loose translation, it was close enough. Now I was really interested in the whole story. I mean, I had nowhere to go for a while, and he might possibly be the one of a handful of people in the known universe who had no idea who I was. "Tell me more, oh wise toad," I began, and he let it rip. "I was just coming off a 10-day heroin binge outside of Cape Town, South Africa, you see, in my other life, the one of sin. I was a bad man. I was a mercenary and a contract killer for hire to any quasi-military organization that had the cash. I was between jobs, and I'd just come off a bad gig in Darfur. Lots of random killing for the new president there. Anywho, I was trying to kill the memories when I ran out of smack and found myself on my knees blowing some guy for a hit. When I looked up at him, his face changed into a true form, the gaydom. I could see him. He was trying to suck my heteroness out of me and fill me with the gayness. I sprung to my feet and ran into the desert, and I stayed there for 30 days and 30 nights, as the Lord Christ told me what I had to do. He said to go to Tennessee and start a church and tell people about the gay demons and help them to be straight. And then he gave me this," he said as he held out his hand. It was a broken and badly stained 1980s Waterpik electric toothbrush with the words, "Christ Wand of Straightness," written on it in red Sharpie. How could I argue with it? It was as clear as day. This guy was right. How could anyone question this story? It was a mystery to me. "Well, that's fascinating," I offered him, trying to control myself. I was, however, in debt to this fucking madman. In the 20 seconds after his story, I had instantly felt better about my situation. Sure, I was facing a lifetime of incarceration and possibly an eternity in hell, but at least I was not him. I did not have that story to tell. I had been through some shit, but I had not fallen to sucking HIV dick until I had hallucinations of Christ talking to me about gay demons. I did want to know what he was supposed to do with the wand. I mean, I could have guessed, but it would be so much better if he would tell me. "So, how does the wand work?" I asked. The Toad of Truth came close to me, his face almost touching mine. "You have to put it up your ass," he said in a sinister tone. And then I heard Tara yelling at me. I turned to see her running out of the building. "Run! Run, Duke! They're coming!" She screamed at me, and she was in full speed run. My new friend looked confused. "Who's coming?" he asked me. I had to think quick. "It's a horde of gay men, bent on turning me and this lovely God-fearing virgin into flaming gay-mongering monsters," I heard myself say. He seemed to spring into action. He grabbed my arm, and then when Tara got to us, he grabbed her too. "Who the hell is this?" she asked. "He is a friend in Christ," I said, hoping there was no God at all. "I have a van around the corner, and my church is heavily fortified," he offered as we ran. Tara shot me a look that said, "What the fuck?" But I was in full tilt bullshit mode now. "Praise the Lord," I said, and then we did what everyone told every child for the last 50 years in this country not to do. We got into a windowless creeper van with a stranger, which at this point was just as good as saying, "Please put that broken toothbrush up my ass." Chapter 11. The burnt-out former distillery on this filthy avenue had the feel of death to it. We had been enjoying the Mr. Toad's wild ride here to the church of the mighty idiot for what seemed like forever. The smells of him and the 5 cans of gas he had mostly siphoned out of cars in the parking lot of the Bass Pro outlet were competing for the first thing to make me puke. Then, all of a sudden, the van heeled to the left and flew up a rocky concrete ramp into this 100-year-old condemned warehouse. The Frog of Truth barely slowed down as we rocketed between pillars and around large boulders that were once part of the structure, and then we came to a halt just before we hit the wall. "They'll never find you here," he exclaimed, and he was probably right. I had no idea where here was at all. We stumbled out of the side door of the van and were greeted by a group of fellow straight warriors that looked like the cast of the Clan of the Cave Bear, only with no young nubile Daryl Hannah in sight. In fact, there was no women at all, a point that Tara made to me with only a look. "Follow me," Toad said, and he and the horde filed in between the two walls into the inner sanctum of the church. It was poorly lit, but I could see that the church was nothing more than a flop house in an abandoned building. There were small areas tucked into the corners with blankets and pillows, which surely were the sleeping quarters, and in the middle of the room, lit by a bevy of candles, was the altar. Tara pulled me to one side. "We have to get the fuck out of here. These people are more dangerous than the OMD." And I was sure she was right, but I needed to know what happened back there to have her running so fast. "What happened back at the Temple of the Bass?" I asked. "I'll tell you what happened. I was made by the waiter, who was an agent a few years ago. I came out looking for you, since you had forgotten that your face was everywhere in the world. He saw me in the lobby and hit some buzzer on his belt, and the place went nuts. Alarms went off, people were running everywhere. There was a voice in the speakers that kept saying that they had a breach. I made for the door, and I saw you with this freak." She had a lot to say, and it was a lot to unpack. We would need another way into the building now for sure, and it seemed that it might be my fault for being out in public. But on the upside, I had made a new friend, and you could not put a price tag on that. The Toad saw us in our own little world and came over. "We're all very excited for you to be here," he offered. "I have never used the wand on a woman before. This is a special day. I'm going to put out all our candles to light the hall." And he walked away in a hurry, yelling for more candles and matches from his minions. Tara looked at me. "If he comes anywhere near me with that thing, I'm going to kick his balls so hard they're going to pop out of his mouth." And that was a visual I would rather skip. She was right, but we needed a few things, and this asshole had at least one of them. We needed a ride. I turned to Tara. "Do you remember him taking the keys out of the van?" She looked at me like I had 3 heads. "No, because it had none. It was hot-wired. Why?" I quickly looked for the Toad. He was busy lighting flames needed to properly screw Tara with a toothbrush, however many that was. I ran back to the van and grabbed 2 cans of gas. When I returned, I tossed them into the pile of the candles at the altar, and the flames raged outward and up fast. I grabbed Tara's hand. "Now, you can get this thing started, right?" I screamed at her as we were running. "This is a fucked up time to ask, but yes," she said as we slipped out between those walls and jumped into the hetero war van. She had it started in a second, and we were backing out of that building about as fast as the Toad had drove us there. Once on the road, we headed south and parked the van about 3 blocks from the pyramid. We were back to the scene of the crime. She looked at her phone and started reading about the building, and then she had her aha moment. "The top! The fucking top!" she exclaimed. "Well, what about it?" "They built it as an observation deck in a restaurant, but it was never completed, and it's never been occupied until these assholes bought it, and now it's open. I bet that's where they keep the top brass," she finished, as she pointed to the peak of the building. "So we will need some kind of luck here to get back in and up there," I said, thinking out loud. "No," Tara said flatly. "We will need a distraction." And she pointed to the back of the van and the 3 cans of gas left. "You thinking Dirty Harry or Die Hard here?" I asked. "I'm thinking a little of both." Tara walked across the street to the 7-Eleven and bought a lighter and some fabric rope, while I prepped the inside of the van. When she got back, we soaked the rope in the gas and broke the back window and tied one end inside the back door, leaving a foot just hanging out. We cut and saved around 8 feet of the rope, and then we put the rest of the rope around the outside of the van and then deep into the gas tank. It was a makeshift long-shot fuse for turning the hetero war van into a rolling bomb. The last thing we needed was a block or a stick to brace the gas pedal down, which we found in the form of a tire iron. We rolled it into the front of the driveway that led to the main entrance doors. We tied the rope to the gear shift and used the seatbelt to lock the steering wheel in place, taking care to aim as best we could for the doors. Even though the van only needed to get close, it would be epic if it went inside before it blew up. I was a little put off by the fact that there might be normal or non-evil people in the hotel, but they would be fine as long as we didn't hit some uber-shallow gas line or something and literally blew up the whole fucking place. The new plan was to light the van and let it roll, then jump the side of the fence, get in via the side door of the parking lot with our room cord while everyone would be running to the main gates to ward off the attack. Once inside, we would get into the elevator and then blast our way to the top deck and kill all the evil fuckers, blocking the elevator so no one could come up, and hold there until we got some local support from whatever hive agents were not turned or had simply given up. Was it a good plan? No. Did it have a chance of working? Some. Should I have ran into the Memphis darkness and hid out forever? Possibly. Yet instead, I was getting ready to pull the rope on the heaving and snorting creeper van as Tara lit the gas, causing the flames to billow out of every opening, like a hell van chomping at the bit to eat something or someone. I pulled the rope on the gear shift, and the van lunged forward, bald tires squealing as it reached maximum speed. It seemed to be veering off from the main door before it hit a small speed bump, and then, almost unbelievably, it turned. It was as if the hand of God had turned the wheel hard to the right. It blasted through the front doors, like it was remote-controlled. In fact, if we had hooked it up to be remote-controlled, I'm not sure I could have aimed it any better. It was so unbelievable, we just stood there and forgot for a moment to run. Run! I heard Tara yell at me, and a second later we hit the side door. The long-shot fuse lit the tank, and the damn thing blew up on cue. If you had planned it for months, it could not have gone any smoother. We were fast-tracking our way to the main elevator, and as we did, Tara grabbed some display of ropes, and in a hot minute, we were riding in the tallest freestanding elevator in the country, flying up to the head office of some evil empire. "What are those for?" I asked, as we had nothing to do but wait, listening to Eddie Rabbit singing Driving My Life Away from the elevator speakers. "Just in case," was all she said, and I secretly hoped we would not have to see what "in case" looked like. Below us, screaming, alarms, and general mayhem was breaking out everywhere. Sirens were echoing in the distance, and just above us was the crown of the pyramid, the all-seeing eye, the deep vein of this mysterious organization. Or would it be just a handful of innocent waitstaff and some unsuspecting tourists that would never be the same after the shit we just pulled? As we floated upwards, my thoughts turned to how this might be seen. How would the media frame this little move here on U.S. soil? I believe the term was domestic terrorism. Yep, that was it. And that was not good. No, look, I'm no nationalist asshole or anything. I've never been one of those Ruby Ridge, America First, protect you from our government types, and I'm not saying that the things I did in Europe and in the Mediterranean were not wanton, evil acts that demand swift and hard justice. I'm just saying that doing this here, in my own country, seems somehow worse. Did it make me a bad person? Yes. Was I wrong? Opinions would most likely vary. All I knew was that after this was over, and if it turned out that I had been on the right side of this thing all along, there was going to have to be some king hell cover-up and a ton of media backtracking for me to remain a free man. And if the odds of the rope fuse thing on the van working were a long shot, that being okay and me being a free man, that wasn't a long shot. That was a loon shot. Chapter 12. "Hey, Tara? Tara, can you see what this says?" "Shut the fuck up. We're gonna die here," she replied. I was unmoved, mainly because I had completely lost it. "Now, honey," I said over the howling wind, "don't be like that. I'm only asking if you can tell if this is the little S from the Bass logo I'm hanging on for dear fucking life, or if it's the big S in shops." Tara was having none of it. "Just grab the rope and tie it to something before we fall." She seemed genuinely rattled by the turn of events in the last 3 minutes. I was calm, the kind of calm that I think comes from total madness. Like a fool standing under a piano, just watching his end come and smiling, falling towards him as his fat belly jiggles while he laughs, his wide and vacant eyes fixed on the Steinway. She simply was not taking a moment to understand me, and I had good reason, but she just wasn't listening to me. "Hey, yeah, but why I'm asking, because if it's the S in the shops word, then we're closer to the ground, which would be good news, right? And if anyone could use some good news right now, it's us. If I could reach my gun, I'd shoot you right now," she screamed at me as she lost her grip on the circle that surrounded the logo on the outside of the building. She was sliding now and right at me. I reached out and looped the rope around her arm as she slid by, and quickly wrapped the loose end around the end of my S. I did not have enough time to tie it, So I grabbed on tight and let my weight fall to counter her weight and fall. And it worked. She came to a stop as her shoulder dislocated and her feet were only about a meter from the inside of the bottom of the same logo circle. She let out a scream in pain, and then she hit the glass with a thud. You okay, honey? I called out to her. Fucking great, she replied. Give me some slack, I can almost stand. And I repositioned myself standing on the S and let out some rope. Is that better? I asked. Yeah, everything's wonderful now. She was being so negative. We're halfway there, I offered in an upbeat tone. I'm going to give you some more rope. Tie it off, then I'll use the other end to climb down to you. I think someone needs a hug right now. And she did. I carefully made my way down and tried to hug her, but she was having none of that either. It had been only about 5 minutes since the elevator doors opened to a room full of agents, shady-looking Eurotrash, cougars in black leopard spandex, and too much makeup, and midgets. Midgets dressed like children, but with deep voices and 5 o'clock shadows, holding tall mugs of beer and smoking fat cigars like the baby from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. They all just stopped whatever they were doing and stood there, staring at us like we had just farted. In some other universe, the element of surprise was working right now, and we had swooped in and brought the villains down. But here, in this universe, this is what is called shitting the bed. I was completely taken back by the preponderance of little people. I immediately thought of what Tara had said about my stepson. I looked over at her in the long and protracted seconds before I did something both foolish and totally dangerous. She looked back at me and mouthed the words in slow motion. I told you. And that was when I rushed out at them, screaming at the top of my lungs and waving my hands around like a madman. It was so preposterous that some of them ran away. Others moved out of the way as I made a beeline for the balcony and what I thought Tara meant as in case. She followed me but had no idea what I was going to do. At the balcony railing was a man in a very expensive suit. Standing there like he did not even see me. He was looking past me at Tara, holding a tall, thin, crystal champagne glass filled with something both expensive and unobtainable to common folks. We both froze for a moment. Tara turned to me. That's the head of the OMD, she said. But I was already moving now, heading right for him, moving so fast I did not have time to think about what I was going to do next. All I knew was that I had just blown up a hotel lobby with a stolen van from a street preacher after terrassing through the old world. I was 10 feet away and still speeding up. He just stood there. He had become the fool under the piano. In his mind, there was no way that what was happening could be happening. In his world, I would slow down. In the normal world where sane people are in control of their senses, I would slow down. Maybe try to hit him or grab him and use him as a shield for what surely was a heavily armed group of onlookers. There would be no way that I would just throw myself at him, sending us both over the railing. Me grabbing onto the big S while he continued to bounce from letter to letter, then glass window to glass window as he traveled down 350 feet into the still raging fire that was breaking through the floors above the main entrance, to, at last, stop his fall by impaling himself, ironically, on a 50-foot extension ladder of the Midtown Fire Department's rescue engine that had just arrived. In a panic and not wanting to be left to answer for my madness, Tara had followed me, but in as careful a fashion as she could, and she still had the ropes. Now we were both standing on the lower part of the logo circle. I made the journey to the ground about 200 feet. "What the fuck were you thinking back there?" she said at last. And that was a good question. What had I been thinking? I had been thinking that past the end of my life, as I know it, and far past the point where I was still giving a shit about what happened next, I had heard her say that he was the leader of OMD. And in a split second, I knew I was going to kill him. I had fixated on him as the architect of my descent into madness and the deliverer of my doom. I had given up on ever getting home or even out of this building alive. And why would I? The fucking place is a replica of the world's largest tomb. A monument to celebration of death. It's no wonder this place was bad luck. Why it never turned a profit and became a joke as big as the pyramid itself. Only some asshole investor in some fucked up red state would think that they could turn a profit on a triangle-shaped tombstone. He had to die, was all I could say to her, and in truth, what else did I need to say? From far below, I could hear someone screaming at us. It was the firemen. They had blown up an air pad for us and were screaming for us to jump. Just then, an explosion from deep inside the building shook the whole tomb. Tara started to lose her balance. I grabbed for her. She pulled me off the ledge. We were falling now, sliding really. We hit the next set of letters and logos like some sort of extra-large Planko game. We both shot around to the right, thankfully the side where the world's largest air mattress was waiting for us, and we kept on sliding. In what seemed less than 5 seconds, we were deep in a huge red and yellow pillow, and slowly sinking to the ground. I was spent. I had nothing left. No fight or even the will to try and run or flee. People were all over us, pulling us up, carrying us away from the mayhem, asking if we were all right. Like they really cared about us. Like they did not know who we were. And then I overheard someone saying that the big bang that had made us fall was the elevator blowing up. It had sent the whole top deck crashing down. They lamented not knowing that there was anyone up there other than the two of us and that poor man that fell. Some other man said that there were small people everywhere inside, like a midget carnage confetti covering everything that was not on fire. And lastly, that they had gotten everyone else out, if only they had known. They had been set on treating us, and I did not want to raise suspicion, but as soon as the EMTs turned their attention to others, Tara and I made tracks. No one could be that lucky for too long. It was only a matter of time before someone in the crowd of normal people noticed that I bore a striking resemblance to public enemy number one. And even though we had just eliminated the whole nest of vipers in one insane move, no one would care. In fact, no one would ever know. Even if I received a medal, it would be in some secret service with no name on it. We were walking along the river now, strolling hand in hand like people that might have just had dinner instead of blowing up a building and killing hundreds. "Well," she said, "all's well that ends well." "What the hell do you mean?" I asked. My head was hurting, my body was beat up, and I just jumped off of a building. "Is this what you call ending well?" She smiled at me. "Wow, look who's not coping well now. A minute ago, on the building, you were the Duke I know and love, but now you're right back to the abducted writer. You're going to have to choose which life you want. Which one is your real life?" She was talking, but I started to hear that beeping sound again. It was louder and louder now. I started to fall to one side. I stepped off the sidewalk and fell down the embankment, rolling into the Mississippi. "Duke!" Tara yelled at me as I was floundering in the water. "Stay with me. This is the life you want. You can simply choose to stay." I could barely hear her now as the water filled my ears. The sound was muffled. A second later, I could not see anything as I slipped into the dark, warm water. Floating. Waiting. But for what? Chapter 13. It had been a struggle to return to reality. What had happened to me was so real that I could still taste her on my tongue. But it was not real. Well, not most of it. There had, indeed, been a woman in a red dress. She had been behind me in line at the store and saw what happened between the cashier and the owner of the business. She had seen me take a bullet because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and nothing more. And she had also shot the cashier dead with a small .22 that her husband had bought her just a few weeks earlier. As the video from the store would show, I had been shot in the head. Well, the bullet had ricocheted off the wall of the building and entered the back right side of my skull, and still had enough force to exit my head 2 inches later. I, however, did not seem to know it had happened. I was out of my car and walking around when the second bullet went off, killing the cashier. Then I fainted. Watching the video was insane. It was otherworldly, like a film made in some other dimension. Yet there it was. It was real. And I had the wounds to prove it. 2 of them, and 2 small plates to plug those holes. It had not been, however, what they call a clean through and through. They had told me that small shards of my skull, and shards from the bullet, because the wall had damaged the bullet before it hit me, might still be in my head, which was fucking horrifying to say the least, and that it might cause some issues going forward. After the woman had shot the cashier, she pulled me into her car and drove me to the hospital. Why would she do that? Because we used to be neighbors. We both lived in the same condo complex on the river a few years earlier, and her son actually went to school with my stepson, although they were in different grades. She had been the hero of the day, and quite possibly saved my life. But it was hard to believe any of it. I had just been on the most insane adventure ever, and it had been as real as anything else in my life. To completely buy that it was all some deep sleep, free-flowing dream was a hard sell. I had been in a coma for a few weeks. During that time, experts from all corners of the internet and Facebook, which is to say total quacks and know-nothings, had offered my wife all sorts of stupid advice. She had followed them all. She read to me. She played my favorite movies all hours of the day with headphones on me. She even read my own horrible novels to me. And according to the real doctors and real experts, these things, that input, have been the grist for the fantastic adventure I created in my head during my time floating in the ether between here and whatever. Tara was the name of a character in my stories. Angela was the name of my real-life savior. Angela, who probably did not even own a dress that costed more than $100, let alone a designer one. Angela, a housewife and mother, who married her high school boyfriend, Robert Smith, a pilot in the Navy, the most vanilla couple with a vanilla child living a vanilla life that you had ever seen. They were like an oil painting of real people, or that paper photo that they put in a picture frame you buy and then toss it when you put your real family in there. Like a threesome they would send up from casting to fill a scene, extras in the background of life, not central characters in an international spy saga. Had those three ever made it into any screen time in any movie, they would have been shot in some crossfire, and she would have been hugging her son and crying for 1 second during the chase. That's it. Angela was a person so far removed from the kind of life I had cast her in my dream state that it was comical. And while being a nice-looking woman, she was nothing as stunning as Tara, that I had fallen in love with on the run. Wait, did I love her? I guess I did. And that was a real shame, since she was not real. Could you love a manufactured player in your dream film? I guess if anyone could, it would be me. As I lay there waiting to be released, I began to think that I had done the best writing ever in my life while I was in a fucking coma. Every subtle detail of the story was based on the most obscure facts from my little life, and if I could just remember everything, I might write the story. One that did not have any references to moist, pouting lips or creamy, soft thighs or his Roman godlike chiseled abs. I might be able to write something just a few levels better for once, and maybe in the process, I could put my memories of Tara and all of that madness in a cool, dry place in my damaged head. One that I could visit, but never stay overnight. I had asked the doctor about writing it, and he thought that it would be a good idea. I, however, was still in a good deal of pain, mostly a headache that seemed to never go away, and oddly enough, I could still hear, albeit on low volume, that beeping sound. He had said that it was a residual noise from when I was in a coma, that it was the sound of all the machines around me, like a song that you can't get out of your head, and even when you go to sleep, the moment you wake up, it's still there. I asked the most obvious question. Was it brain damage? He just laughed and said, "That would be my guess, but really, if that's the extent of it, you're a very lucky man." And I guessed that he was right. Chapter 14. The sun was hot, but it was still cooler than Florida. The sound of the water beneath us and the breeze made the deck perfect. I had gone home from the hospital and tried to start writing. The sound was ever present and very distracting. I could hardly get an hour in before I had to stop and put on some headphones to distract myself from the distraction. It was a mess. About a week into my old life, I woke up one night to the smell of what I thought was a fire. I walked through the house and then out into the back lawn, but found nothing. As I turned to walk back inside, I stepped on something hot. I jumped off it and grabbed around in the grass in the dark until I found it. It was a cigar, and it was still smoldering. I made my way down to my stepson's room and opened the door. He seemed to be asleep, but I thought I could smell smoke from the room too. It seemed impossible, but there it was. I did not want to cling to the memories of my delusion where my imaginary girlfriend told me that my real wife and kid were spies, and worse, that my 8-year-old was a 30-something midget. I did not want to superimpose the visuals of those midgets on the top deck smoking cigars and playing grab-ass with the waitstaff on the kid, but the kid was odd, and the room did smell like smoke, and I was possibly losing my mind. I had heard of people with brain damage and trauma experiencing phantom smells and such, and I was willing to chalk it up to that. However, it felt to me like he was not asleep. "You awake?" I said in the dark. There was no answer. I fumbled for my phone and turned it on, turning it around and put the light on his bed. He was still, maybe too still, like he was holding his breath. A moment later, I heard my wife's voice calling to me. I withdrew from my investigation and returned to bed. "Everything okay?" she asked as I slid under the sheets. Is there any way that Billy could be smoking?" I asked her. "What? Why would you say that?" she asked in a half-sleep voice. "I found a cigar on the lawn, and it was still smoldering." She reached over and rubbed her hand in my chest. "Honey, really? He's an 8-year-old. A cigar?" she chuckled. "But I could smell it," I said out of impulse. "We're going back to that doctor tomorrow. This might be related to your injury." And she was right. I heard her reaching for the nightstand and the bottle of sleeping pills. "Here," she offered me one. "Try and get some sleep. This'll help." I took it, and in a few minutes, I was down for the count. The next day when I woke up, they were gone. Their clothes and shoes all still neatly in the closets. Their accessories and bath products all in place. They just were no longer there. I waited a few days, but there was no call. I called endlessly, but after a few days more, the phone said it was disconnected. I searched the backyard and found 27 cigar butts in varying spots. I was not happy about that. It seemed that if I was not insane, that someone had been in our yard often, smoking cheap cigars. That was when I went and checked his room. Really checked it. Under the bed, I discovered a box of condoms and a few toys. Sex toys. The horror set in. He was a midget, and he'd been having sex with his pretend mother, right in our home, while we were pretend married. It was not just disappointing, it was sick. Or was I sick? I really needed to know which thing it was. For all I knew, they were right there in the house. I was just unable to see them because of my insanity. So far gone inside my head that I was talking to imaginary people and unable to be here in reality anymore. I could ask someone, but how could I trust what I heard, or even if they existed? I was reminded of the movie about John Nash, A Beautiful Mind, who, while being one of the greatest minds of our time, was insane and did not have one or two but upwards to 5 different people that he had invented and carried on lifelong relationships with. And in fact, one of them was a spy, and that one had brought John on board to help with the war effort. The only problem was, no one was real. Was this where I was now? Lost in some crazy town in my head? It had been about 4 months since the shooting, and one day I opened the mail and there was a check from some insurance company for $250,000 addressed to me. There were a few problems with it. One, I had never hired a lawyer, and I was never contacted by anyone about some kind of compensation for my injuries. And lastly, the check was drawn on a bank in the South Pacific, the First National Bank of Fiji. I deposited the check and I dusted off my passport. I was going to get to the bottom of this and maybe, just maybe, find out the truth. On the plane, I had a dream. I was walking through the hospital in Melbourne, Florida, and I saw them, my wife and son, standing over me. I was in a coma. The beeping was loud and clear. The doctor came in and said he did not know if I would ever wake up, that the brain swelling had reduced and there was no good reason why I would not come out of it. but they had tried everything. I walked on by. I looked in at myself and I smiled. If you would have asked me how I would have felt about a dream like that a few weeks ago, I would have said it would have made me sad and scared and uneasy. Yet here and now, on this plane in first class, having this dream, I was fine, calm. In fact, it didn't bother me at all. All I needed to do was wake up and find that beach with the shallow water and those villas on the decks, on the water. And I knew that she would be there, and I knew why I knew. Tara was massaging my back now, moving up my neck to the back of my head, being careful not to rub too hard where the exit wounds were. I rolled over and she laid down with me on the chaise lounge. "You okay?" she asked in a strange tone. "This is just all so perfect," I said. "And what's wrong with that?" she asked. "Well, I've been fooled before. How do I know that this is my real life?" She smiled and kissed me. "I guess you'll just have to take it on faith. After all, which one of these lives would you rather have?" And that was a fair question. I had seen both, and there was no way I wanted the other. "This one, no question," I declared, and she laid her head on my chest. "Well then, this is the real one," she offered, as her fingers danced in my chest hair. I reached my hand down to find a cold glass of gin and tonic. Tara lifted her head slightly and motioned to the paper on the table. "Did you see the news story?" she asked, and I had. About a fire at an abandoned building in Memphis where a strange homophobic church was ran by a homeless man called the Truth Frog. It went on to say that while he did not know how many of his followers had died in the flames, he had made it out and then disappeared from the hospital burn unit a few days later. I guess she was right. This was the real one. "Well, that could be a problem later, huh? I mean, foreshadow much?" I offered. She laughed. "Yeah, there's nothing like leaving a villain alive for a sequel, right?" she said. And I guess she was right again. I took a sip. The drink was perfect. I closed my eyes and let all of this perfectness surround me. I could hear the gentle wind passing through the palm trees, the water lapping at the posts supporting this perfect home, the birds talking to each other. I could hear Tara breathing in and out. And just below all of that, almost too low for anyone to hear, was something else, some other sound that would fade in and out. It was that goddamn beeping sound. But that was okay too. "Do you hear that? That low beeping sound?" I asked her. She never moved from my chest. "Just ignore that. Concentrate on us. Here." And so I did, and it faded away. It was, after all, the only thing that mattered, being here with her. So I ignored it, and as long as it stayed there, off in the distance, and left me here to be with her, I would be happy. Here, with Tara and her red dress. This has been The Red Dress Confidential. Author Richard Hendry. Copyright 2025.